Welcome to Gone Fishing with myself, Andrew Spear, and today we're joined Eric Kaiser from ThoughtWorks. So thank you for talking to us today.
Hey, Andrew. Thanks so much. It's great to be here. I'm excited to talk about fishing. There's all kinds of watering holes out in the world, and people are bringing their rods for sure.
I appreciate we could continue that pun. I've actually had some feedback that I should change the name to Spear Fishing because my last name's Spear, but I thought that gets a little meta, but it could set us aside. So to kick us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, about ThoughtWorks, your role, and why you're interested in the fascinating world of phishing and cyber attacks?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a business information security officer at ThoughtWorks. I sit between the regional business units and professional services and the day-to-day work of the security team, sort of a bi-directional translator for security requirements and risk assurance. I've been at ThoughtWorks about 4 years, and for those who don't know, ThoughtWorks is a pretty mature software consulting company. A lot of people here over the years have literally written the book on things like agile software development. Our chief scientist helped write the agile manifesto. So we've been in the software development game a long time. What brought me here initially was that my love for security was kind of just a perfect dovetailing of the roles that were available at the time. So here we are.
I come from a no code and automation background in sales and marketing. As part of this, I've been looking for guests. And as I was coming into the room, I said to our CTO, I'm interviewing someone from ThoughtWorks. And he was like, oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, I've read books. And I was like, oh, well, that's great. It always reminds me of how big every industry is, and you can have huge players working across. Thank you for that introduction. We're here to talk about phishing, but before we dive in, 2026, what are you interested or excited about, either personally, professionally, ThoughtWorks? Like what's coming up that you think is going to be a big shift or continue to evolve?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, AI is on everyone's minds, right? And one of the things that ThoughtWorks has just done is launched a new sort of AI works platform. We're really not just sprinkling AI on top of things, right? Because we know that 80 to 90% of AI deployments fail. I think people might think that we're a little bit late to market, right? Like, people have been doing AI development for a couple of years, but we really wanted to take the time to do it right. And there's been some really fascinating and genuine results coming out of that. Not letting AI be put in place of humans, but as a tool assistant. I think we're really starting to see a lot of the conversation shift from AI has to go everywhere to it is a tool, it's a good tool, it has its uses, and finding the way and the place where that will fit in. And that does include in defenders' toolkits and also, unfortunately, attackers' toolkits. I've spent some time playing around with cloning my own voice, for example. There's freely available models out there that do embed watermarks if you're listening for it. But, I can feed it a voice sample of my recording and have it generate funny messages to, friends and family, things I would never say. I can't hand them the voice model yet. But so really, we're going to, I think, continue to see that evolve. There was the big trend a couple of years ago about like dark or evil AI. But really, again, it's just the tool. We'll see maybe less jailbreaking of models, but as computing advances, if you can buy the RAM for it, people are going to be running models locally and doing, pipelines for attack. So it's an interesting and exciting 2026 coming up, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it's a constant battle. And of course, hackers are always the ones who come up with the interesting stuff first, right? Pushing the boundaries to then figure out what to do with it. One of the things that I'm fascinated about is, you've got the rise of the creator economy. You're duplicating yourself to create content. Creator-led founders or founders who become creators to really scale their brand, which is just ideal for cloning, right? If there are 100 videos of myself out there, it'd be very easy to create, as you said, even just with a little sample, but to create really fantastic clones of founders and executives. And it tends to be the more senior people who are out there talking, running, going on podcasts, which actually makes you think those are the people in power who are more likely to be cloned to then create sort of the pressure-based phishing. And so what are you seeing some of the good protections against it so far? Because, it's AI over AI fighting AI right now. What are you seeing that's working really well? You talked about taking a pause and thinking, what else are you seeing that's working really well?
So I came from more of a hacker and a sysadmin background, right? And one of the many twists and turns that my career took was actually being a technician at the Apple Store for a couple of years, which was really,
Okay.
and Apple really hammers on the intersection of technology and human behavior, right? They're really about empowering people with technology. And that was why I got into security in the first place, was because that was interesting to me as well, right? Red teaming and social engineering and Kevin Mitnick's exploits and all of the rest of that. We've seen voice messages sent by people purporting to be our CEO sent over WhatsApp. We don't do WhatsApp. We don't do business over WhatsApp. The things that we find effective are education, right? We have a fairly critically minded workforce. Please don't come test our workforce as a result of me saying that. This is not an invitation to test our defenses. We building relationships of trust where we know that the people who are going to be asking, the CEO is going to be asking people for things, right, in particular ways. That's going to be in person. That's going to be over the phone. That's maybe going to be outside of official communication channels, but it's going to be outside of pre-established communication channels. So building people's immune systems, right? The more unusual signals there are, it's coming over WhatsApp. It's a voice message, not a phone call. It's for $10,000, which is actually a smaller amount than anybody should be asking for. Each one of those should trigger a little bit more of your phishing immune defense. Putting guardrails around checks and balances, right? If someone's like, hey, you need to send $10,000, it's okay, well, someone else has to sign off on that, right? Hey, we need to pay this bill. Okay, well, someone else has to do that. And it has to come through official communication channels. Some of that is for compliance purposes. So we have the paper trail and we can verify, we're no longer a publicly traded company, but when we were, we had to, maintain Sarbanes-Oxley compliance and other pieces, and just having the paper trail and having people sign off so that it's documented. Somewhere in there, people usually say, oh, wait, this is weird. Why am I doing this? Why am I signing off on this? And if I am not an advocate for bureaucracy, but sometimes if you add a couple more layers and you've trained people, and their immune systems are working as it were, you'll get somebody in there who says, wait, this is weird. And all I need is one person to say, hey, wait, this is weird. And then
flags it. Goes,
the attack chain falls apart.
Do you think time has a big part to play? Let me reframe that. In one of my previous roles, a colleague of mine joined, and it was an interesting situation because it was time and pressure based. It was a sort of a interesting request. So they got a text. And again, the time based, because first week, so you don't know how the company works yet. You don't know what the communication channels are. You don't know what's normal. Gets this text and says, we're giving out gift cards to our consultants this year. Can you go down to Tesco and get 500 pounds of gift cards? And I remember seeing them leave the room and they were like out the door. And I thought, okay, that's strange at the time. But then they came back and they're like, I think I've just been scammed. And they had gone down, bought the gift cards, scratched them off, replied via text. And so I don't know from the hacking or the phishing side whether they knew that this phone number had just been registered as part of the company account plus the email. So they knew it was the first week, or if it was just random, but it was that number of low amount wanting. Do you ever see that with onboarding where things come in more at the beginning of someone's tenure at the company?
I think what we see is that time and experience adds seasoning to people's immune systems no matter what. And whether someone is a junior developer, sort of new to the company or new to their role, or, they've been doing it for a couple of years, but there's still some of that, lack of seasoning. And no shade. We all come by our experience the hard way. I've gotten pretty close to getting got a couple of times. I think, as I was mentioning before we started recording, one of the things that I do is onboard new hires. Every couple of weeks, there's a new batch of people that we hire and they have a call with me. And I say, hello, I'm the face of security. Please come talk to me. If things are weird, I won't be mad, and it's really starting to try and build that immune system from word one to help people understand and not be afraid, right? Because the thing that happened in that gift card instance wasn't necessarily that he got it was he was do focused on making a good impression and he didn't probably want to be wrong or want to ask clarifying questions. It's always the only thing I try and instill, because the simpler the message is, the easier it sticks, is if it seems weird, talk to InfoSec. Right? If anything's funny, just ask. We're all a bunch of, interesting people who love solving problems. And if you bring us something that we haven't seen before, it's not, oh man, why did you do this? How dare you? It's, oh, that's interesting. I haven't seen this. Oh, or even thanks for asking. Turns out it's like this, but at least we got to have the conversation. So having that open door, I think, is really one of the biggest things you can do as a company to encourage employees to step forward, right? That culture of continuous improvement and blameless incident reporting.
Yes, I agree. So a quick question for you. You said you wear this shirt a lot. The background is known to be yours. Are you ever worried about yourself being cloned to create some sort of hacking or phishing?
Some days, all of the communications that I have or send to people or get a hold of them are through sort of corporate channels. And a lot of that is going to be through, behind phishing resistant MFA and multiple layers of exponential back off and whatever else. It is an interesting tension for me as someone who is intensely focused and concerned about security and privacy, and also in some ways being a like public visible member of ThoughtWorks and someone who speaks about security. It's a very dynamic and I think will be a perpetual tension. I am excited and interested to see where that goes.
Yeah.
Hopefully not too interesting.
Exactly. I don't need that much interest in my life, just enough. The first thing that we're developing is a bidirectional two-factor authentication where you can just hold a QR code up to the screen and certify both ways. So this is a good situation where we assume it's the person and you're having a conversation. I think that ThoughtWorks is obviously incredibly sophisticated around this. So not the target market, but less sophisticated, less smaller organizations where they don't have the systems in place. But it's just an interesting thought because you're right. You said you are the face of InfoSec, which pros and cons, right? So what's actually, before we go into interesting phishing scams, at Apple, I'm intrigued when you are sort of on the floor as sort of the genius, were there any times where people were like, oh, if I've been locked out on my phone, can you get me back in, or things like that, or it was more like face-to-face fraud? Did that ever happen?
If you open a door, people will try and walk through it, right? So there's always people who are interested in trying to see if there are exploits behind some of the policies. Yes, absolutely. In some ways, and to be clear, this was probably almost 15 years ago now. The thing that I appreciate about Apple and the thing that I appreciate about some of the security policies that I've seen be effective against really targeted phishing is the in-person aspect is actually helpful, right? We all have an ability to judge each other through, even this is, more of a conversation. We're getting more tone and body language and just that sort of like essence of what makes somebody a person. And you can see how they're reacting than chat, for example. And in person, there's even more of that. And so there's a certain level of judgment and intuition that you can apply in those senses. People have absolutely tried to take advantage of every policy you can imagine. Sometimes Apple does a good job, especially these days, of architecting things so that unless you are the original owner of the phone, you can't get in, for example. And that has benefits where iPhones are not necessarily as valuable for theft anymore and they have to be parted out. If you're worried about your information, you don't have to. But the downside to that is someone dies, for example, and even with all of the legal authority in the world, Apple can't unlock the phone, and sometimes photos and other things are lost, and that can be heartbreaking.
Interesting. I didn't know that it was that extreme. It makes sense on a lot of things. But my grandma passed away last year, and my dad obviously everyone knew her passcode. We had sisters, so luckily got in there and then took all the photos off. But you're right, if it's deeply guarded secret and then it's gone.
There are the ways around that would be making sure that your loved one has iCloud turned on and paying for storage, and Apple's, there are like recovery contacts and abilities to add people now through the iCloud mechanisms where your partner could get back in should something happen to you, to the information in iCloud, not the phone specifically, but anything that you had backed up. And I think that was a result of seeing the pendulum swing a little too far in the direction of individual security.
Yeah, like with all of it, you've got to try something. Everyone says I need more security, and then you go and do it, and then the outcry is, well, I didn't think about that use case. No, of course you didn't impact you until it impacts you. You don't know.
Yeah, the most secure system is one that's encased in concrete, turned off in a basement surrounded by armed guards, but no one's ever going to use it. It's not going to do anybody any good.
Exactly. It's just a brick. So cool. All right. So interesting phishing or fraud schemes that you've seen either in the last year or recently. Like when you first got that message, what did you think of? What came to mind?
we get the normal volume of background like DocuSign and PayPal redirect spam. That's sort of the background noise of the internet, especially for business email compromise attempts these days. We had one, the other thing that came up is November is like healthcare enrollment, right? Open enrollment period in the US where people can select their healthcare market and beneficiaries and whatever else. And everybody goes through it every November, even if you're keeping your same plan. And so we see a huge uptick in open enrollment scams. A lot of people like, hey, we're your healthcare provider, or even, hey, we're your HR team. You need to select these benefits. We had one that came through that was like healthcare benefits notification. You must do this. That was from a Mexican tacos website, like Steve at, besttacosever.com, which was interesting. But mostly funny. That one took you to a page to download a PDF. And when you visited that page, it tried to install a Chrome extension and a service worker. That was a shotgun. We didn't see that as spear phishing, for example. Sent out to a bunch of people and them not caught it. And we had a lot of people report it as phishing. The other one, we had a performance time of the year depending, but also just sort of ongoing. We had one that was a well-branded email coming from a payroll and benefits provider, supposedly. The return address obviously wasn't, but they had cloned the branding. The PDF had a QR code in it. And the PDF was like, hey, you have to scan this QR code to log in. Here's your email. Here's the username you need to use. You'll get a password emailed to this email address, but also here's your password in case that doesn't work. And then under that, it had, this document contains HR level 4 protected information, be aware, be scary. And my favorite was sharing credentials violates corporate policy 8.2.1. After they had put the password in the PDF that they had emailed to people.
So if you get far enough down in the email, there was someone who came on podcast the other day, he's talking about Google Drive scams, and he's seen a lot of those recently where, because you've got the shared with me, basically you can pop anything up in the shared drive. And so what was interesting is that the titles were quite explicit in terms of what they said was in them. So explicit, but he could see the preview of it, and actually the thing contained in it wasn't explicit at all. And so, obviously it's Google Drive, you open it up on your browser, but it's synced to your local desktop, obviously, therefore it deploys. But we couldn't figure out why you would create explicit names for the files, but not have any explicit content inside it, and why you'd be more likely to click on that if you found that in your Google Drive versus like HR Review 2025. Can you think of a reason why that would work more? Or
everybody wants to change from the day-to-day routine, right? There's always that sort of like, did someone share something naughty with me? Like, let me take a look.
Right.
Like, oh, never mind. And it's sort of, I think in some ways it's again about sort of overcoming that. People want to gossip. They want to say, oh, this is like, maybe this is interesting. And then because it's different than you expected, like it's not actually, they're like, oh, it's just HR, somebody did that. And so they feel safer and more likely to engage with it.
You don't report it because you're embarrassed that actually that could be, you're embarrassed that you clicked on the link. And you don't want to go, I clicked on this. Yeah. So why would you click on that?
Yeah.
And then that's absolutely. The human. Actually, that was another thing I saw on your profile, that you did philosophy at university. Does that, so philosophy, computer science, how does that guide some of the stuff that you do right now, the human behavior stuff?
So I think a lot of people, did you see the Tron movie that came out 2012, 2014? I
don't think so, but
okay. So there's the spoilers for anyone who's watching and hasn't seen it. I apologize. The movie's old enough. The conceit is that there is a digital clone of somebody who was left behind, and he, without human intervention, he goes off and he says, I want to build the perfect system. And as with most things, right, that involves getting rid of everyone because human beings are messy. And I think that a lot of security professionals, and I apologize in advance to anyone who might identify that way, because I certainly used to, is you want to build the system where people can't break things, right? You want to build the perfect system that keeps everyone safe and there's no outside boundaries. And what I learned is really that intersection of you build systems that help people do the right thing, that sort of guide them in the direction that you want. You put the guardrails in, you make it easy to do the right thing. And the further away you get from easy and normal, the more friction and mud and molasses you have to wade through. At that point, hopefully, when you're wading through honey that's waist deep, why am I out here way over, away from what everyone else is doing? It's been very useful to open my eyes to how people think and accepting that, what are we building this in service of? What are we doing security for? What is it that we're trying to protect? And just sort of having a little bit more of that broader mindset and context setting has been very good for me.
I like that. I like your visual metaphors of things. That's a really good example. Why am I waiting all the way out here when my colleagues are doing that? Do you have a couple more minutes? Because I wanted to ask you one more thing. Yeah. Well, we've been debating digital identity internally. So you got people who control an identity, you've got organizations, and then you've got this agentic workforce that is just being released into the world. How do you think about identity agentically? So if I build 5 agents that go and do things for me, I'm giving them permission, I'm authorizing them to do it, but I might forget to unauthorize them. And my big intrigue is, if they go and do something that is damaging to the company or external, who's liable for the agent? How do you think about that? And because it's obviously it's gonna be exponential, but what are you thinking about that?
There's a few separate pieces there. So one of the best practices that we've seen from a traceability and accountability perspective is, one, you need to have an explicit conversation about that, right? And people are going to land in different places in startup life where you're shipping code, multiple times a day and you have AI agents often running fine. Ideally, with immaturity and time comes a little bit more corralling of that. And I don't want to say putting things in boxes, but you need some way to auditability and traceability for who took those actions. And if that's an AI, part of the problem here is that things are non-deterministic. So you still need to be able to go back and say, all right, I don't know why this was done, but who did it? And it was, okay, well, the AI did it. Okay, well, who turned the AI on, right? And then it becomes a matter of either law, which isn't there yet, or company policy to say that person's responsible. It doesn't seem like a great idea to be able to dust your hands and say, well, I turned it loose and it did things. We've all seen Terminator, even if it's not the easiest metaphor. The other piece is, the thing that I have seen over and over in conversations with my colleagues is all of the same things around data protection and all of your classic security tools and techniques still apply. Yes, having a human in the loop is important. Yes, you want to be able to audit and trace your AI, but you need to, if it does something that's bad, why did you give it that permission, right? Put boundaries around it, right? Give it just-in-time access. You're like, I turned agents loose. Okay, give them access to do what they need for an hour, right? SSH access to production, even for 5 minutes, is maybe not the best plan unless you've got somebody there, driving it. But ideally, you shouldn't have SSH access to production at all. Push a new deploy and your agent can help you write that code. I tried very hard to not be a person who is like, hey, slow down. We need less innovation. What I am trying to say is, as always, bake some security considerations and some security thinking into, okay, we'll give it this permission and it might do things. How is that any different than giving a junior developer SSH access to production and they can mess things up? We would want someone senior there with them to be co-driving or to help them go through it or to pair with them so that they don't get that messed up. And I think that a lot of the same considerations around it apply.
That junior developer thing it's almost a speed issue, even though they can have the same impact. I was building a knowledge base in Claude Code just for the company. So, when this is done, I'll feed the transcript in to update our knowledge and thinking. But the speed thing is, a junior developer can only do so much in a minute and push things live. But you watch Claude Code go, and it scares me with a 3-hour-old knowledge base that I built that has no production value, but still, it's like, yeah, that thing's just going. And, if you forget to stop it or you give it auto permission, you could come back in 10 minutes and it's done. That's an interesting one. I think the other interesting thing about, go ahead.
What I was going to say was an example, right? I do a lot of, there is a wonderful power for those of us who maybe don't do as much hands-on work anymore, you were talking about founders and creators, and I think that there is a great deal of empowerment that can come from AI. I spend a lot less time writing code and doing security engineering than I used to, but when I have an idea, I can sit down with Gemini or Claude Code and get to something that's getting this idea out of my head for how it might work in 30 minutes instead of 2 days or a week of my free time writing code, which is great. I do all of that work in a sandbox. So it has access to just the repo I'm working on. I'll run it in permissive mode, but it doesn't have network access. So it's constrained to what it can know on the training data. And if it gets loose, nuke the container and start over.
Yeah, exactly. And that I think maybe where you're alluding to is because Jason, my CTO, has worked in every big bank in the city, 30 years. He is the technical brain. I've come from a sales, but also automation background where I've started to see the power of these things. All right, that works. And then maybe I'll build it in Make, which is more stable and contained. But you've got this series of builders now, which is great. And they're finding the same thing. They're spending, they're like, this is amazing. And what you get sort of two paths. One is you get a couple months into your business and this thing is so bloated and terrible that you have to rebuild it from the ground up, which is very expensive. Or the other way is that, you get nuked on API costs or phishing or bots or whatever it is, or you just delete the whole code base and you're in trouble. I think that's really interesting because at least where you're coming from is a level of knowledge that's been built up and experience. So you know what good looks like in any industry, comes out and you can look at it and go, well, that's terrible. That's crap. Or that's on a good start. But what you do know is that when you need to then hand it over to someone to build it, that point, that thing is not the thing that needs to go into production. That's why 10X is good developers, is because they know what they're looking for. They know speed. They know what good looks like, or it can 10X crap the other way. All right, let's hear the one you saved for the end of the podcast, the story.
So you were mentioning the absurd cost of API calls. We had a user who reported an email that they thought was phishing that appeared to be from AWS. And they were a little freaked out because it had, it was sent to them specifically. It had a whole bunch of UUIDs and, garbled consonant only hashes in the URL. And they were like, how did they know the client name? How did they know all of this stuff? Well, how did they send it to me? Like, this looks like phishing. But the number one reason that they cited is why it was phishing was because the cost for it was a bill, and the cost for the project was like astronomically high compared to everything. And it turned out they had just overrun something and spent too much money in production and had gotten an email. They were like, this can't be real. It's too much money on the AWS bill. And that was a learning experience for everyone involved.
It wasn't actually phishing. It was just a real email. That's interesting because they could have just ignored it and gone, no, that's not real.
I would rather someone come to me and they genuinely did and they recognized their mistake. We had a conversation with them and worked through it and everything was great. And like I said, it was a learning opportunity. One of the things that I'm very passionate about is branding. And I don't mean, I'm not a visual designer, I'm not a UX designer, but what I mean is that half of the time we get legitimate emails reported as phishing because people didn't use a company email template. And so the more consistency you can have in that, the more you are like training people to expect that. But again, it helps people sort of maintain that consistency of like, this is what an email from internal systems should look like.
That's interesting. So I said Jason, CTO, and then Michael, the chief commercial officer. He started as a graphic designer actually. So he did 10 years in agencies building UX. And so he comes, and I've done graphic design for a long time on the side. So both of us visually are very like, all right, this thing needs to look good. But, as you said, extends to internal, external communications to build up consistency of what you think that should look like as an organization. All right. Any closing thoughts? I've really enjoyed this conversation. So anything that you haven't said that you'd like to?
I think the only other bit of semi-provocative security advice that I'd like to throw out there, we've seen a lot of watering hole attacks and drive-by downloads where people are looking for installers on the web. They need to download a separate terminal or something else. The more sort of like consistency and safe paths or guided paths you can provide. So like managed homebrew, for example, teaching people how to install that, an internal app store, where you build people's trust up to say, go here if you need an app for work instead of downloading it from the internet. But also installing an ad blocker company-wide. It saves resources, and it's another great first layer to put in terms of your malware defenses, because you'll miss a lot of the drive-by downloads and watering hole attacks that come in through sketchy ad sites, for example. Yeah, and even on search results. My mother called me before she called HP, thankfully, because she was having an issue with her printer, and she searched online for HP support, and the first result was an ad, but it was a scam. And trying to mitigate that, everyone's human. Deploy an ad blocker in group policy or macOS MDM and get it out there and improve your users' quality of life and decrease the noise.
Can I just ask two terms? You said watering hole and then drive-by. Could you explain? I've never heard either of those terms, but could you explain those two as a concept?
Yeah, absolutely. So watering hole attack is you put up a website and find a way to redirect users, right? The visual metaphor there is an oasis in the desert. People are wandering around and they see something and they want to go visit. So the HP website, compromised installers, things like that, people just go looking. You're not targeting, you're just kind of sitting there waiting, and people come and they're like, oh, and then they download the malware. And drive-by downloads or drive-by attacks, you're visiting a website, there's a compromised ad or something else, and it will just auto-download something. Or it will say, hey, you visited this website, you need to install Flash Player, or there's one that's going around that's in order to bypass the Cloudflare bot check, right? Like prove you're human. You have to run this command in terminal, and it's a pop-up in the website that's like, hey, if you want to go here. And they're sort of related, right? You'll see people put something out there, and kind of the dark side converse of a honeypot, right? The defenders put out honeypots to catch the attackers. Attackers put out watering holes to catch people who are coming in and trying to download things.
Nice. I love your use of, as I said, visual metaphors. It really brings it to life.
You were asking about my philosophy degree, and I think the thing where it's been most helpful is the power of story, right? Humans are very narrative driven, and the more you can tell a compelling story that people want to be a part of, but also a narrative that engages them, the more that it will stick with them and remember.
Perfect. That was absolutely fantastic. Visual metaphors. So thank you.
It's been my absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed talking about security. So thank you for the opportunity.
Perfect. And thanks very much. Eric, where can we find you? LinkedIn, Twitter? Do you want people to connect, or?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure there will be something in the show notes. I'll get you that information. And it's probably the easiest way to find me if you want to connect and chat about security.
Have a great day, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you.